So first things first is probably why did I decide to start with this process on the back here? And the answer to that is that it happened on the day that I was actually setting up my first blog post. Now, words, when we choose words, they all mean something different to all of us. And during the course of a conversation, we all do all the time processes like this. We selectively delete out parts of phrases and conversations and communications that go on with each other. So it can be that when somebody says something, we don't hear the rest of the sentence. So if I can give you an example of that, I do quite a lot of case management, and what that involves is looking after people who've had really big accidents. And I was looking after somebody recently, and he said to me, the consultant didn't tell me that I could start to put more weight on my leg. And I said, okay, so what did he actually say to you? And he said, well, just step things up a little bit. So I said, fine, okay. Now, I happened to be in process of pulling all the medical notes, because that's something that sometimes I have to do in order to be able to find out how the process is going along. And in the letters that had come out from the consultant to the GP, it quite clearly stated that he had been told, in the letters it said, Mr. So-and-so has been told to start to take more weight on his leg and progressively start to weight bear through to full weight bearing, and I have suggested that he get rid of his crutches, move on to one crutch, and by the time he comes back to see me in six weeks' time. So here is a clear case of this person really not hearing what was said at this conversation with his consultant, with the specialist. This is really important, because when we're talking about health, if you delete a part of that conversation that goes on, this can have a monumental cascade and a huge impact and effect on what you believe and what you say to yourself when you come out of that meeting. Because in this particular case, the story that I'm telling you, this particular young chap had a bone that wasn't healing particularly well in his leg. And he was, I think at the root of it, as is always the case with a lot of these things, was a lot of fear. And he was scared of putting weight on his leg. Now, the consultant is somebody in a very high position of power. And in that meeting at that time, he did exactly what went on in this process. He went into the meeting, and in that meeting, he genuinely did not hear, during that conversation, he genuinely did not hear his consultant say to him that you can start to put more weight on this leg, you can come off 2 crutches, go onto 1 crutch, and by the time I see you in 6 weeks' time, you should just be freely walking around with just 1 walking aid. What he heard was, the consultant told me to step things up a bit. Now, if you compare the letter that was sent by the consultant, where the statement was, I have told this person to start to progressively increase weight through their leg, to stop using the crutches and just go on to 1 crutch, etc., with the consultant told me to step things up a bit. What does step things up a bit actually mean? In fact, step things up a bit doesn't really mean very much at all. Whereas come off crutches and go on to 1 crutch is a very clearly very clear message that the consultant is giving. So we've got a perfect example of a situation like this that has taken place in a health environment, and it has had a huge impact on the behaviour of the person who has come out from that consultation. This selectively deleting and not hearing information is a very, very, very important factor within health conversations. And I will be going into more depth with this, because health, and I'm not just talking about sickness and disease, I'm talking about the whole thing to do with health. Health is huge, and if we are all, and we do, deleting big parts of sentences, maybe because we just simply don't hear them, Perhaps because, as happened in my case, we disappear off into our own head and begin to start to have a conversation with ourselves, begin to go off into a little sort of parallel universe where we've got a nice little story that begins to run. What happens is that we miss a whole chunk of information, and perhaps because we don't even realise we've missed that chunk of information. What can happen is when we rejoin the conversation, it might just be at a point where the person is saying, "So, is that all fine?" And it could well be that what you say is, "Yes, that's fine," because you may not hear it. You literally will not hear things that are said. And we know research has shown that during conversations with patients in clinic consultations, people hear very little about what is actually said to them. And so this is perhaps to give a bit of background and information, and in another podcast I will introduce you to a way in which you can keep your attention on what is actually being said and to actually ask questions. So I'll put this up now because I only want to put short podcasts up, vlogs or whatever, and I'm going to be writing some of this down as well. So speak to you again soon.